Many of us lose our flexibility and mobility as we age, and most of us consider this a normal part of the aging process. With chronic pain, stress, and busy lifestyles, it's never been more difficult to take care of our bodies. But healthy movement and taking care of ourselves should be a part of our daily self-care routine. The ability to move around freely is something that most of us take for granted, but mobility can be a significant challenge as we age. Stiffness, pain, and reduced ranges of motion can make it difficult to perform everyday activities. Even such simple things as getting out of a chair, climbing stairs, or even putting the dishes into an overhead cupboard. A loss of mobility can also lead to social isolation and depression, and certainly increases our risk for falls and injuries. But losing flexibility and mobility isn't a foregone conclusion as we age. Improving and maintaining mobility can help improve our balance and coordination, and can help increase our flexibility and ranges of motion, making it easier to perform these activities, as well as continue living an active lifestyle and doing the things we love. Fortunately, there are a number of ways to improve mobility, recover from life stresses, relieve chronic pain, and to avoid injury as we age. And our guest today is going to teach you how to improve mobility and optimize recovery. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach, and my mission is to help you get into the best shape of your life, no matter your age, so you can show up in the second half of your life as the healthiest, strongest, most vital version of yourself. We have a great show for you today. Kody Olinger is here to talk to us about how we can stay flexible and mobile as we age. But before we get to that, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Ned. Ned makes the world's best natural remedies. They make full-spectrum CBD products for general health, stress management, and sleep, as well as an awesome magnesium supplement for sleep support. My personal favorite product is their hemp-infused body butter. I absolutely love this stuff. It's great for rubbing into sore muscles to help facilitate recovery or help with achy joints. You can check these folks out over at helloned.com, and because you're a listener of this show, you can save 15% off your first order by using the coupon code SILVEREDGE at checkout. That's helloned, helloned.com, and Silver Edge all run together. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with today's show. My guest today is Kody Olinger. Kody is a certified strength and conditioning coach, and he's also a certified fascial stretch specialist. He's been working as a coach and therapist for over 5 years, serving people from all walks of life. Kody's clients include NFL Pro Bowlers, Major League Baseball pitchers, USA Olympic bobsledders, MMA fighters, as well as everyday people like you and me. So without further ado, let's meet Kody.
I'm from Boise, Idaho, went to school at Boise State. While I was there, I got my degree in exercise science. I always thought physical therapy would be kind of my route. Soon after graduating college, I got a phenomenal internship opportunity that took me to San Diego, California. This was a place that I'd always, Fitness Quest 10 is the name of the gym, but always read about him, saw the owner, Todd Durkin, and a lot of stuff. And I'm like, this seems like a pretty cool place. And to me, coming out of college, I was thinking PT, I was thinking college strength conditioning. I wasn't really sure which avenue. And this place was great for me because, I was able to get into a setting where they offered everything from yoga, Pilates, sports performance, things like that. So I'm like, if I do a good job there, I'll make it happen. So, to zip through it, I did a great internship and kind of fought my way to get onto a full-time position. And my first year there, I was really developed a passion for coaching and personal training. And that was where I was starting green, taking on any client that I could kind of get at the time. And that first summer, I'll never forget, we were very fortunate to have a lot of pros, especially NFL guys that were in and out. And that was always my dream, to somehow work with these pros. And so that first summer there, I was just in the middle of a session, and I see this guy show up with this table, sets it up right in front of the gym. It's got these straps on it. And like an assembly line, all the headliner pro guys that I had always dreamed about working with were just like cows, just lining up to him. He was doing these 10-minute demos, wheeling and dealing on them with this assisted stretching technique. And I was like, what in the world? This is the busiest trainer in the gym, and I've never even seen him before. He doesn't even go here. So I looked at that and I went and introduced myself, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm just a gym owner from New Jersey. I practice fascial stretch therapy. Your boss flew me out to work on all the guys. And that's when it clicked for me. I'm like, whoa, like maybe I can entertain some other options before committing to a physical therapy school. And so I looked up fascial stretch therapy, or FST. They were headquartered right there in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll be that guy. Cause I was already part-time working at a PT clinic as well. That was kind of my lens or my niche already. So I was like, this will be perfect. And did the course. It blew my mind. First session back at the gym, I happened to be on Darren Sproul's. So I just hit the ground running. I'm like, man, just like that. And then once that kind of happened, the floodgates opened, and pretty much everyone was kind of seeing me more for that recovery, that mobility piece, more so than the training. So that kind of just grew from there. And now I guess that was about 5 years in San Diego. And now I'm back home in Boise, doing still a little personal training on the side, but also really kind of going into building my own business of KO recovery.
So KO recovery, right? For Kody Olinger, KO recovery, and we'll certainly come back to that. But I want to back up a little bit in that story. So you mentioned a couple terms there that maybe not all of our listeners are familiar with. You first mentioned somebody came out with a table and they had straps on it. So you might want to explain kind of what that is. And then you talked about assisted stretching, and then the FST, that fascial stretch therapy. Why don't you tell us a little bit more specifically kind of what that modality is, what it entails, and who it's for?
Yeah. Absolutely. So assisted stretching, kind of depending where you live, it's definitely been a growing trend over the past 5 years, especially in San Diego. There was probably 3 or 4 different businesses that would just be assisted stretching. Now that's the difference. There's a lot of different ways to do it, kind of like your trainer. You could come in and see somebody who's the TRX guy or the kettlebell guy. Could just depend. So that's all in the assisted stretching bucket. For me, I practice fascial stretch therapy. That's, again, its own unique school of thought and principles and courses that you go through. That's really for everyone. I mean, I want to say it's steeped in athletics. That's where I've applied it the most. But FST or a FST practitioner can work in tons of settings. There's tons of massage therapists or chiropractors or physical therapists that have gotten that FST certification to add in the assisted stretching. And so what does kind of make it different is, you mentioned the table. The assisted stretching is a lot better choice for some people, just as simple as the comfort level. Some people don't like that really peaceful, quiet massage room feel where you strip down and do all that. FST is great because you just have a massage table, and there's these kind of straps that there's a couple different brands and things like that. But essentially, you kind of pin one leg to the table, which makes it a lot more comfortable for the client, a lot more effective means of leverage for the practitioner. And it just makes it a lot easier, lower barrier to entry to get to those end ranges and work on your flexibility. So it's very applicable. It's really a lot of fun being able to set up a table just about anywhere, outside, in the front of a gym, or in the middle of a gym floor, people's houses. It's very easy to just get the session going.
Okay. So, I want to dive into a little bit of that. But before we go there, you had mentioned that it's basically for everybody, but I believe you've worked with some pretty big names. Is that right? I mean, you've worked with some actual pro athletes as well as normal folks, right? Yes,
definitely. It's, again, a huge credit to the place, Fitness Quest 10 in San Diego, where it was just a perfect storm. I was the right guy at the right time, where we'd always get the Drew Brees, the Gerald McCoys, Steven Strasberg, all these pros, Mike Chandler in the UFC world, that they'd be there to train for anywhere from a week to their whole 3-month off season. So being there, it was kind of a great place to kind of get that as the advertisement, or it's like, oh, if that's working for this person, it could work for me. And that largely is the case. But a lot of times, what we're doing with the pro athlete may not be the exact same as anyone else, but the concept is still there, where if you want to be a high functioning individual, no matter what your profession or your sport, taking care of your body is a huge priority. And that could take a couple different avenues or ways, but it seems to be that assisted stretching works great for a lot of folks.
Okay. So let's put a pin in that, because I want to come back and talk about that, how that might apply specifically to my audience. But you had mentioned that there's this big bucket, it's assisted stretching, and you're kind of one of the niches within that then is this FST, this fascial stretch therapy that you're certified in, and kind of that's your niche. So when you say fascia, what is fascia?
Fascia, man, it's preface this by saying like I am like the fascial expert, or that is sort of my profession. Crazy thing about it though is I think at this point in our existence and where we are for humans, I think there's a lot more we don't know than we actually do know about this stuff. It's still, over the past 20 years, I think it's skyrocketed in terms of developments and research and all these things. So whatever I say now or what I know now, put a pin in that, because 5 years, I'm probably gonna be saying something totally different. So it's an emerging science, so you just got to roll with it. So it makes it, good and bad, because sometimes when I get into the weeds or read up on stuff, I'm like, holy crap, the more I learn, the less I know. So fascia, I guess to answer the question, is fascia is how we're put together. There's a couple great ways to look at it. It's this concept of tensegrity. Now, tensegrity is basically tension with integrity. So a good example would be like a pop-up tent with the tension rods. That tent has that dome shape that can retain its shape. Now, it can handle pushes or wind blowing, and it always comes back to its original shape. And our bodies actually operate much along those same lines, where you could look at a cadaver, and if you take a muscle out, say you just snip your bicep out, it actually shrinks up to about a third of its original length. So these muscles, if you imagine, they're actually like almost stretched in place and then tacked down, and they all depend on one another. So when one area is tight, another area might get a little longer, and there's this whole host of like a domino effect of things that kind of happen throughout the body. So the fascia it's the network that runs from your internal organs to your muscles to your bone. It's the packaging that puts us all together. If you look at just muscles, like if you were to have somehow muscles without fascia, think of muscles as just being like a pile of ground beef. There's no structure to it. There's no orientation. The fascia is that clear. If you take a piece of steak and rub your finger through that webby looking stuff, that's essentially the fascia. That's the packaging that brings your muscles into a position, intertwines the nervous system. It's where all the things speak together with your mind and your nervous system. So it's quite robust. It's quite crazy, but it's literally almost everything fascia is connected to. So you can't really look at the body so much in isolation. So you look at a single joint or an isolated exercise, I always kind of laugh, because there's a whole lot more to the picture from a global perspective than just what you think you're doing to one specific spot.
Okay. Yeah. That's one of the better descriptions I've heard of fascia, because you're right. It is difficult to describe, right?
Yeah.
And people think, they might get it confused with tendons or ligaments or other things that are, well, it's not bone. It's not muscle. It's not organ. It's this other thing, but it's this sheath, or what did you call it? Tensegrity? Is that right?
Tensegrity. Yep. Tensegrity.
Oh, do I have love that term. Yeah.
Oh, I guess the video won't be here, but I got a really cool model that I walk clients through in terms of visualizing it a little better. It's just these sticks with these elastic bands to it. You can see how bringing any two ends closer together has this cascade effect on other parts. So look up a tensegrity model. It's a great way to just be like, what in the world is he talking about? It's like, okay, I can kind of get it. So.
All right. Well, again, thank you for that. I think that's a great foundation for us to kind of continue our conversation here. So you mentioned that you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. You're a young guy. You're smart. You're obviously talented. You got this talent for this FST therapy. You got these pro athletes coming in. And like you said, that really helps you with your kind of your advertising, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Saying, hey, I worked with these guys. But now, how about people listening to this? So just the weekend warrior or the person who's just starting on, say, a nutrition or a health journey, how might something like FST or active assisted stretching, how might that apply to somebody like that? Somebody, say a woman that's getting ready to turn 60 that's just now starting on a health and fitness journey?
Yeah, I obviously think it deserves a seat at the table. If for whatever reason if you're just starting to work out or you're just curious about your body, seeing FST professional or getting that service done, I think would be just phenomenal. The best way I can think to apply it for that type of individual would be, obviously the session would go great. I think once you have one session done, you kind of could get your eye open about, oh, wow, I didn't know I could move that way, or it felt so good to stretch. There's a lot of people that just write stretching off from the get-go because it's uncomfortable or painful. Assisted stretching, when done correctly, and especially from an FST therapist, is gain without pain. That's our mantra. So it's a very non-intimidating thing to jump into. And the cool thing about it too is, at least how I like to practice and teach my clients, is exactly that, teaching. Even if, say, you do one session and you feel good, you're feeling fit or healthy, or you're just starting to get going, you don't have any aches or pains just yet, it's a great way to be on top of it. Get a little more insight of how your body should move or can move, so that you can do those things yourself, so that you never need to be that person in pain when it's too late to go seek out a therapist. You're like, oh, I've tried everyone else, maybe now I'll try FST. So ideally, you want to learn as much as you can about your body, learn a little bit better how to move and how to work into those constantly tight or achy spots so that it's not a problem at all. But then on the flip side, if you are a person that's had, I feel like everyone can relate to some level, that old injury or this old thing, my back's always tight, my hamstrings are always tight. Again, that's a no-brainer positive to go see someone with assisted stretching to see how that responds. Because I think a lot of people just don't think of it at all. They think they have to go to a doctor or physical therapy. They're obviously there for good reason and all that, but it could be something as simple as just learning a bit more about your mechanics and your flexibility ranges and how to safely work on that.
Yeah, that's very well put. I love all of that. So what I hear you saying is that, for one, it's kind of going to help reconnect us to our bodies. I think what happens is, especially those of us that get a little bit older, we just lose that body awareness, that awareness of our body, which was kind of an innate thing when we were younger. But there's also, you had mentioned, aches and pains. And so I know there's many people over 50 that can relate to what you're saying, right? That chronic back pain and that feeling of, that just is how it is, right? That's what happens when you get old, or, oh no, my knees are creaky and I can't squat, things like that. So is something like FST, can we say that it would be helpful or rehabilitative for some of these chronic aches and pains?
Yeah. I mean, I can't guarantee it. Who knows the injury history and how deep that goes. But one, I know it's never too late to get started or trying to fix it and do better. And there's been hundreds of success stories of not only just myself and client results and things like that, but it's always one of the best feelings when somebody with that, like, oh man, yeah, my wife just drugged me to this session. They've accepted their fate, right? My back's always been bad. I've seen acupuncture. I've seen PT. I've been to multiple chiros, and they're like, so yeah, let's see what you can do. And when you actually get results with that type of client, man, it's super powerful to really change their life. Because just when they were accepting of this pain for the rest of their life, it's like, man, there can be a pain-free solution and I can work on this and experience relief. Like, that's huge. So that's Absolutely. The ideal situation. It's honestly, it's a big challenge to take on, but man, like when those clients come around, I definitely get a little salivate in the mouth being like, okay, let's go. I'm going to fix this person. Like you need this the most and I want to try. So. Right.
No, I'm 100% with you. I personally have known people that have changed just into healthy habits, and maybe they start an exercise routine because they're trying to lose weight. That's pretty classic, right? And along the way, what they find is, hey, my energy's improved, my mood's improved, my libido's improved. And lo and behold, that achy back I've had for the last, I can't remember how long, is better. And so, just being reconnected and learning to move, learning about your body, it's got some tremendous, tremendous benefits. And I think also what happens, not only as we age, do we kind of lose that connection to our body, that body awareness, that mind-muscle connection, but we also lose some mobility and some flexibility. Now, you had mentioned both of those terms, I believe, in our brief discussion here. Talk to us a little bit about flexibility and mobility and the differences between the two.
Yeah, I guess put simply, like this is a easy example I kind of can have anyone, or if you're listening and you have a spot on the floor, you can mostly practice along with. But flexibility is basically how far you can passively move somewhere. So if you were to lay on the ground and have someone grab your heel of one leg and just lift it straight up, right? Like a single leg hamstring stretch. Flexibility is generally how far you can get without until it reaches a stopping point, or kind of like, yep, that's a strong stretch. That's your flexibility. Now, the interesting thing is there's a whole school of thought, functional range conditioning and FRC, and they've really tapped into this flexibility versus mobility route. That's for another day. But anyhow, the next step would be mobility, and that's how far you can actively move that same limb through that same motion. So flexibility is generally always going to be larger than your mobility. It's a matter of how close or how much you can diminish that gap. So for example, if I can take someone's leg, or somebody raises your leg and it goes clear past your head, great hamstring flexibility. Passively, your structures can do that, no problem. But the interesting part is now, if you take that same leg, same motion, and you can't even get your leg up to 90 degrees, whoa, what's the case? We can't blame that as tightness or lack of flexibility, because you just proved you had it. This brings up the other half of the equation. I always call them peanut butter and jelly, is that motor control and that muscular strength and coordination to control that range of motion. So, somebody who's overly flexible, if flexibility was the end all be all, or it's a yogi, they can move in all these positions, they can contort, but they're always getting hurt. It's like, okay, well, I guess theoretically, if flexibility was the holy grail and the only limiter, you should be injury proof, but people can still get hurt. And that comes down to that mobility piece where you need the strength, coordination, and muscular control to keep our joints and limbs and ligaments and everything safe. So that's kind of the main difference between flexibility and mobility is passive versus active.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great clarification. So when we say flexibility, I can bend over and touch my toes, for example, and that's a very passive thing, and that's an indication of how flexible I am. But my mobility is my ability to maintain control, strength through that full range of motion, yes, and to be connected with that. So I think that both of them are important. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean,
as you grow old, we want to be flexible and we want that mobility, right?
Yep. I absolutely think so. I mean, if you were, say, the most restricted individual where actively use your mobility or you can't flexibility, it's not there. Generally, it's a safe rule of thumb that you start with a very small bucket of movement potential. There's no way you can kind of create that space. Starting with working on flexibility, just doing your basic static stretching, basic things like that. That's always step number one, because then once you have essentially a larger bucket of movement potential, or at least you have some flexibility ranges, then you can work on maybe adding some load or some mobility to close that gap. So yeah, that's a good point.
That makes sense. So the greater your flexibility, the bigger range or you said the bigger bucket you have of movement potential and possibilities to practice that mobility in. Okay. So let's move on, because now we're into this realm of recovery, right? I know you're really big on perform, stretch, and recover, right? So we've talked a little bit about stretching. When you say recovery, what are we talking about recovery, and how does what we're talking about factor into recovering?
Yeah, gosh, I've actually gone round and round, because recovery, it can be so broad, or what does that even mean? And I've kind of been playing around with how I'd like to define it the most. And what I keep coming back to, again, this is an ongoing thought process here, but right now, what I think is the biggest linchpin or gatekeeper with entering the recovery mode, say, is your mental state or your level of stresses and where your mind's at. I think in today's world, it's so darn easy to go, whether that's work, even when people are exercising, it still is a stress on the body. You're pushing it, you're going, and obviously you're going to feel good and you get the endorphins and all that. But from a biomechanical standpoint, you're still stressing your system. You finish your last set, you do your finisher where you jack up your heart rate, you shower as quick as you can, you're already on the phone worrying about your next meeting. All that, I think, is getting people in such an accumulation of fatigue and stresses that we're on this opposite of recovery. So to be in that state where you're focusing on recovery, it's just a less stressed state, and that could take shape in so many ways. I really like to ask questions with clients that are, they seem to be doing all the right things. They eat well, they work out, they do this or that. It's like, how about some mellow yellow time? Are you going on unplugged walks, especially in nature? Are you into prayer or meditation? How much of your day are you just focusing on your breath? And most of the time it's next to none. And I think any amount you can get, I'm not saying you got to spend, your whole Sunday in this monk-like state or anything like that, but anytime you can shift a little bit more that way, I think good things are only going to come from your health, your energy, and all the things you're looking for by just slowing down.
Yeah, 100% with you. And I'm almost a little surprised you answered that way. I really expected you to go into the mechanics of, it's important to recover from this intense workout by working on these mobility exercises and make sure you stretch properly before and after exercise. But instead, you went a different direction. And what you're really talking about is attacking that chronic stress, right? Which, because you're right, a workout is a stressor. But really, and it can be an acute stressor, right? And some of these more intense style workouts. But what you're talking about is this mindset of how are you dealing with stress in your life? Because biologically, our bodies really aren't differentiating between real dangerous stressors, like somebody attacking you physically with a knife. That's, you would have a very specific biological response to that, dumping the cortisol and all of this good stuff and increasing inflammation and getting you ready for fight or flight. But we get that same biological response when a coworker fires off a nasty email, or when we're fighting with a loved one, or all these, in traffic, all these different things. And these are more chronic stressors, which are accumulative over time and leading to very, very unhealthy outcomes. So first things first on our recovery bucket then is going to be, you can't really eliminate stress and you can only control it or manage it, I suppose, right? But you had mentioned some of my favorite things, right? A prayer practice, a meditation practice, a journaling practice. And to your point, you don't need to spend the whole day in a cave somewhere or being, walking in nature. 5-10 minutes of these things will, if you don't have that practice already, will yield amazing results. Absolutely love that. So let me take that to the next level then, because really what I did expect you to address this on a more physical term, but I love where you went with that. Talk to me about my weekend warriors, my CrossFitters, my obstacle course folks, my boot camp junkies, these HIIT style people, these people that are really pushing hard. Everything we just said stands for these folks, right? They need to manage their stress. How can these people recover in order to, maybe some of these folks are competitive in their age groups, for example. How do these folks recover? And is there a place for the modalities that we're talking about, the active stretching, et cetera, or assisted stretching?
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I wanted to bring up just a second ago is it's KO recovery, which is kind of the holistic package. And the stretching and the FST just happens to be a tool. That's just one way to do it. There's so many different ways that you can do it. Some people just primary focus of these sessions are, for me, I guess 40 to 60 minutes are my typical sessions, but the goal is to be in as relaxed of a state as possible to kind of bring that environment to you. So that's obviously a great primary kind of way to go about it. Looking at these people, because I've worked with a ton of them, trying to get them to slow down for 5 minutes is like you're talking a different language. It's just not going to happen. My favorite way to maybe sell or just get you started a little bit in that direction is like kind of almost, again, think of it like a challenge because those folks are always wanting a challenge anyhow, is whenever they're done working out or at the end of a day, it's an awesome breathing practice just to see what that kind of sensation is like. And it's, again, a lot more challenging than it might seem. What I have clients do, especially at the end of their workout, they hate stretching. They're not going to stretch anyway. I just be like, okay, I want you to just lay on your back, put your heels up on a bench, 90-90 position, or even your feet up straight on the wall is great. And you put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, and you close your eyes. And as you inhale, keep your hand and your chest as still as possible. Breathe through the belly as much as you can. You inhale through the nose, try to take a good 5 seconds in, deep exhale through the nose, 5 seconds out. And then you just say one to yourself for one breath cycle. And a challenge to these folks is see if you can lay there with your eyes closed and make it to 10. 10 breaths sounds very, no problem. But you'd be surprised how when people are really taking those deep, relaxing, soothing breaths in and out, you get to about 4 or 5 in, your brain goes. You start thinking about what you got to do, or like your mind just goes like it always does. And then it's like, oh crap, what number was I on? And it's like, okay, you got to restart. So trying to just get to 10. And when you actually do that and you stay present, just following that air going in and out of your lungs, some people dang near fall asleep, or they wake up and it's like they just took a nap. And just that minute that kicks you from that stress response of just the workout, which is great. And at least you're in that quiet mode where recovery can actually take place. All of a sudden your body's not doing its primary human functions of just that stress response, but now we can actually invest resources of repairing and doing all the things that you want to respond better after your workout anyway. So just something as simple as that is great. Obviously, you can do it on my table for an hour where I kind of force you to, but even just breathing on your own doesn't take any hired help or anything like that. That's a phenomenal way to experience some of that benefit.
Yeah, and I can certainly appreciate that, especially with some of our type A personalities. Those you had mentioned those go people who may not have a practice of regularly taking 10 slow, steady, deep belly breaths. And just doing that can really, really move the needle in terms of recovery, right? So,
and then it at least gives it a fair shot of like, okay, you can evaluate that. Like, how did you feel after truly doing that? I mean, if they really are like, no, that was the worst thing ever. Like, okay, we'll have to dummy it down a little further. But most people will be like, oh yeah, like that was actually really nice. So it could be a sign that's like, body's been wanting that.
Right. Yeah, it could be a sign that your body's wanting to recover, right?
Yeah.
Very specifically. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the prevention side. So we're talking about how we recover from, and we were just talking about how you might recover from intense exercise. And that same prescription, I think, would probably apply to those that are not doing intense exercise, right? I mean, I think that's probably a good prescription for anybody. But what about preventative? How do we manage soreness? What are there things that we can do preventatively before we work out, or just as a part of our daily life to ensure that we have this flexibility, this mobility that we were talking about?
Yeah. I mean, again, I kind of have a two-part answer for this one. So where my mind automatically goes is a more holistic approach. And that is our bodies, when you're trying to get in shape and do everything, and basically any injury or pain comes down to your stress exceeding that your body was able to handle, whether that's acutely, like overloading the bar on your back and you blow something out, or over time where all of a sudden you just lean for something and something went out. At some point, your work demand has exceeded your body's recovery demands, and that could happen really at any time. So the first thing in terms of preventing an injury or preventing pain from happening is prevention, where you try to really monitor your workloads. That's where seeing a good trainer or a coach, making sure that you're progressing at the right pace, because slow progress beats no progress at all, and especially a step backwards through an injury. So you always want to make sure that you're just kind of moving that needle very incrementally. That's why, doing challenges out of the blue when you have no preparation, high risk of injury for that. So you just always want to check in with how much has my work been lately in terms of prevention. Now, if again, that doesn't make you 100% exempt from doing an injury. You could be, making all the right progressions and scaling properly, and you still want to be on top of that. So, gosh, it seems simple, but a good 5-10 minute warm up, anything that literally warms up your heart rate, your body temperature, it really doesn't matter to me. It could be the treadmill, could be the bike, could be whatever. That's just no arguments to it, just like that flat line. Obviously, I think there's better ways to warm up for whatever workout you might be doing. That could be a little more specific in the form of a dynamic warm up or some specific mobility drills beforehand. You want to make your warm up look like a mini workout that you have to unfold. I wouldn't walking on the treadmill before, say, a heavy upper body day is good, because at least it checks that box of warming up your core temperature. But I think there's some good things you could do with bands or med ball throws to kind of really fire up the upper body. So that's always kind of general good rules of practice, is matching your warm up to your demand that you have coming up, to watch your workloads, and to do that consistently.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice, especially for those of us over 50, right? And I think that's where a lot of us get into trouble. And you had mentioned jumping into a challenge that you're not prepared for, but yeah, that warm up piece, and it doesn't have to be that long, right? I mean, is 5 to 10 minutes a reasonable amount of time to warm up? Yeah.
And honestly, saying that out loud, I mean, even 10 minutes would be a pretty good one. So yes, even 5 to 7 would probably be the sweet spot, where you're just doing something to raise that up, and it doesn't need to be exhaustive. I know at some points, especially earlier on, I still struggle with it at times, but I have all these ideas of if you mobilize that, then you got to do that, and you got to activate that. And it could quickly turn into like a 30-minute warm-up series. And that's a little overkill. The beauty's in the simplicity with it. Try to find your bang for your buck moves, where I always encourage clients to kind of just take a second to check in. Like for a FST session, for example, I try to pick 2 to 3 interventions, 2 or 3 things for them to try and work on. And I say, there's no script to this. Just do it for however long you want, as long as you do it consistently, usually like once to two times a day. But the key here in what I'm trying to get around to is finding the exercises or warm up drills that you feel actually make a difference. If you just do this list of 30, you don't really know which is giving you a good bang for your buck and which ones are waste of time. So if you just pick a few and you kind of are always going through that list being like, no, I felt this one was tight, but I did it for the last, 10 warm-ups. Like, I feel like I got it now. So you always want to kind of keep in mind of not just this generic warm-up routine that you do every single time. Warm-up's a great time to add movement variety, working in different planes and kind of tweaking it along the way and seeing which ones you actually get something from, because you don't want to do something just to do it. You want to make sure that you're feeling something changing.
That's a good point. And that makes me think automatically of most folks are familiar with the idea of progressive overload when we're working out, right? Well, let's say we're trying to squat more weight. Well, if every session we add 5 pounds to the bar, we're progressively overloading and we're progressing towards a goal. I suppose we could have those same types of goals or some sort of a progression with a flexibility or mobility routine as well. Is that fair?
Yeah. Like, gosh, I went to a Perform Better conference years ago, and one guy, exactly that, like just how you have your phases or blocks of training. He does that with his soft tissue prehab stuff or his flexibility drills. So like for this month of programming, you're going to do this stuff. Like this month you have tennis ball soft tissue release. So, you do your feet, your glutes, calves, whatever the case may be. Next week's a foam roll. Or next month rather, then the next one could be like a barbell. So just keeping those things in check, because again, our bodies are master adapters. All it does is takes in information, and when you do it continually, it learns how to do better and better. So if you're doing the same dang drills you've been doing for your warm-ups, just like same weight with your bench press, you're going to not see any more returns on that. So you want to just tweak it like a sidestep. It doesn't need to be like reinventing the wheel all the time, but just a simple shift from going from this density of a surface to this one could oh wow, you have different receptors that respond to everything. A touch as soft as a feather, or deep tissue and temperature. There's so many different receptors on your body that any one tool can't be the end all be all. It can only kind of stimulate a certain group of sensations or goals that you have, whereas shifting it to a different one isn't better or worse, it's just different. And that variety is a huge piece.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I guess I hadn't put a whole lot of thought into that. I know in my coaching practice, I coach in-person CrossFit classes, and I do online coaching as well. And so I have different routines for warming up. And to your point, always try and match the warm up to the task at hand. But in terms of that periodization or making a block of warm up, I really like that concept. I need to kick that around in my head a little bit. So it is hard too, because I mean, you do kind of, I feel like being in the business, you kind of inherently, I don't know if that's just from what you or we enjoy doing ourselves, but definitely there can be very common ones that circulate or are there every time. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but I think that idea, or being aware of being like, oh, I've been doing this for forever, just a little shift. Only good things happen from that. Sure. And I think especially with my population, so that over 50 crowd, right? A lot of those folks have got their mobility issues very commonly. When I hear, the arm straight over the head. So there's some shoulder mobility. I hear it. Usually it's a complaint about the knees. Oh, my knees hurt when I squat. And that's almost, I would guess, I'm going to ask you, is that almost always either ankle or more commonly hip mobility issues in your case?
Yeah, it's definitely overhead reaching is a huge one, and hips. Hips. It's
those
funny
because
people
seem to be the big ones. Yeah. That and back, I suppose. Yeah.
And what's funny too is because I feel like sometimes people just say tight hips when they don't exactly know what that means. Because when you say you have tight hips, it's like there's been fewer people than not that when they say their hips completely tight, the hip being a ball and socket joint, it can move everywhere. Theoretically, it can move. So chances are I can find one or two movement planes or directions that your hip can move well in, but it's like it's this one position, as one move that you are feeling limited in, or that's tight on you or whatnot. But that's not to say your hip is completely tight. I like to take it a step further and be like, okay, what motion, what movement gives you problems? Teasing that out so it's not so daunting. Again, I try to speak very kindly to clients and their bodies. I think there's a lot of shaming, especially if you go to the doctor and get the medical images done. People can pick you apart when they run a fine tooth comb through it. And then all of a sudden that client identifies with their injuries, and there's a lot of fear mongering where they're like, oh, my doctor says my knee's bone on bone. I can't squat. I can't do this, and I'm doomed. It's like, try to speak very kindly. It's like, hey, you said your hip was tight, but actually you move really good here and here. Boom. That's awesome. It's like, what we can work on is this. So yeah, that was kind of a long-winded explanation. Not really sure where I took that one from, but anyhow, hopefully that was worth something, but
No, I agree. I think that when people say something like my hips are tight, to your point, that hip, same with the shoulder, right? It's a very, very mobile joint. And chances are you have good mobility in some planes and restrictions in others. And I suppose an expert like you, your job is to pinpoint that and then prescribe corrective exercises to help correct that. And that is so much different than that same person you talked about, kind of medical fear mongering, that same person going to a doctor who's going to say, oh, well, if it if it hurts your shoulder to go reach overhead, don't reach overhead. Or if it hurts your knees to squat, well, don't squat, which is an absolutely absurd prescription, right? Or more, or even taking that a little further, the prescription being, oh, well, here's some pain relievers for the pain that you're feeling here, as opposed to, which are all treating symptoms, but are not getting to the root cause. And I think many times that it's people like you that can actually bring these people out of this chronic pain or out of these mobility limitations, right? And it's just a matter of doing that investigation and reconnecting people with that movement. And I think especially in an aging population, that's more and more prevalent, that I've got I'm, like you said, I'm bone on bone, or the doctor said this horrible thing, so I can't do that, which would include, say, sitting down and standing up, or bending over and picking something up, or putting something in an overhead cupboard, etc.
Right.
So
yeah, I think it's a very valuable thing, because as soon, like kind of along your line, is as soon as somebody says they can't do something, or the doctor told them not to, obviously there's things you can't work around. There's spinal fusions or bone spurs. There could be bony blocks where it's like, you know what, you can't, in that case scenario, you probably can't. But I think it's important to, one, always challenge that. If it is something that's just impingement or giving you pain, always just try to lean into it, not training through pain, but getting as close to it as you can without problems flaring up. I think trying to teach people and conquer the things that they were told they can't do, and over time getting them to do it, is amazingly powerful and could change people's lives. And also, again, with those people in mind, that where if you can't bone block or spur where it's physically not there, there's so many modifications to exercises or movement. So it's like, okay, you maybe can't strict military press anymore, but getting on an incline bench pain-free, you're training that same pattern for the most part, and you're not hurting yourself. So I think there's plenty of ways to work around it. If you look at, okay, does this person just want to exercise or do this movement to do the movement, or is it important for them to just maintain whatever overhead range they have? I think it's generally the latter.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. And I really think that it really comes down to people kind of taking responsibility for themselves and their care and their well-being, right? And I think that's changing. The medical community is changing and looking a little more at root causes, but I think more people are more willing to take responsibility for their health. But it is challenging for, say somebody who's in their 60s, who their entire life, the doctor is the end all be all of authority on health, on all things health, and oddly enough, also nutrition, which that most doctors don't have a much nutrition background. And looking at a lot of doctors, might guess that maybe they don't have the best nutrition practices themselves. But leaving that aside, I do think that there's something to be said for reclaiming responsibility for your health. And so hats off to the work you're doing. And speaking of lifestyle and becoming more healthy, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what are your recommendations for people who sit for the majority of the day? Because unfortunately, we have an epidemic of sitting, right? Most of us sit in the car on our commute to work, and then we get to work, we sit in offices, and we're in this horrible hunched over position on keyboards or etc. So for folks that sit a lot, do you have any general tips on kind of how they might incorporate some of these things we're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a rampant theme across the populations, is the amount of time sitting. And therein lies the problem. Is there's nothing wrong with sitting down. There is no bad posture, in my opinion. It's just a matter of sticking in that posture too long. The dose makes the poison always reigns true. So really, I mean, like, if you're sitting a lot, again, I get sometimes it's so easy to be glued on the screen. You're into your work and whatnot, but anything to get you out of that posture is phenomenal. So literally just standing, walking are always easy ones. Those that are really wanting a little more direct or a fine tuning approach, I have a couple protocols online and stuff, but I love next to people's cubicle or their desk, wherever, just getting a thin mini band or a super band, just hitting some palms up band splitters. You can look up band splitters or band pull aparts online. I just love that, especially with your palms up, brings you from that palms down posture that you're at the keyboard to kind of an upright, shoulders back, arms rotated back. That's just, like, to me, a no-brainer in terms of, okay, we're here, let's work a strength drill to go the exact opposite. So doing a bust out a set of 20 every hour or two would be awesome. Standing and hip flexor stretch, anything you want to do with that, where you're kneeling down, anything to open up, you just look at where that joint is and you're having your knee closer to your chest. anything where your knee goes further away from your chest is going to be great. So you can do, kind of like your standard prone press up where you're getting that kind of stretch on the front, or any glute bridges, because sitting on your butt and your glutes turn off and they're not getting any stimulus to stay strong to help pull your leg back. So those three are my favorite. Any stretch on the front of your hip, any strengthening for your butt, glute bridge is great, and anything like a band pull apart. That's my three-headed monster in terms of a specific corrective exercise or intervention you could do. But that's all for the go-getters that are listening. If anything, though, frequent breaks, frequent stand-up, reaching your arms back, doing that often prevents that posture from sticking, which is the biggest issue.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that that's just something that we're all trying to overcome, that sitting in that hunched over position. And what you're describing you're talking about a minute or two breaks, right? Once an hour.
Yeah.
So it's not that disruptive, and it will make you, especially for that type A go-getter who I'm crazy, I got to get this done. You'll be more productive. You'll be a better boss or employee or coworker or whatever if you're having this routine of self-care and taking care of your body.
And just another quick note on that is I'm a big, again, with the society where our mind is so sidetracked and we're not taking any time to account for what's going on internally. I heard a great quote a while back, but anyhow, I think it speaks to when we are invested in our work and on the computer, we're not getting the feedback from our body being like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. It might be hours where you come up like, whoa, like that was bad. So anytime, again, those little breaks, even though they are, like you said, a minute or two or less, that provides like a mental check-in. What I tell people is pain and discomfort is your body's request for change. Just like when you're dehydrated, you get thirsty, your body needs water. Pretty simple. Pain and discomfort is the same thing. If your back's feeling a certain way, it's like, okay, like I've been in this position too long, whether that was today or last week was crazy. It's literally just saying, I need something else. This isn't comfortable. Do anything that can kind of feed that. If that's 5 seconds of a stretch, check in. Oh, okay, I'm good. Resume as you were. Try to correct a little bit. If it creeps back up, oh, time for another break. Mixing that in as often as your body tells you, that is when you get really good at staying on top of things, is being in tune with what your body's saying. And that comes through frequent breaks.
Yeah, that goes all the way back to that mind-body kind of connection we were talking about, being aware of your body. And I've mentioned this, I think, on one of my recent podcasts. I had a guest, and I can't remember who said this. It might have been Joe Ames, but one of my early guests had made a reference to when his body whispers to him, he wants to be able to respond accordingly. Yeah. And my thought at the time was, holy moly, most of us don't hear our body when it screams at us, let alone whispers at us. And I think that goes to exactly what you're saying, right? Your body is sending you signals. Are you in tune with your body to receive those signals? And are you taking actions to respond appropriately to that? So Kody, let me ask you this. So people are listening and they're thinking, okay, well, a lot of what I'm hearing describes me. I feel like I'm not as flexible as I used to be. I'm not as mobile as I used to be. And I do have these chronic pains, and I do think my hips are tight and I can't reach over my head. What sort of resources do you have for these people? Obviously, you're in Boise, Idaho, and if anybody happens to be listening in that area, they have access to your studio there. But what about folks listening to this in other parts of the world? Do you have some resources that you can suggest for those folks?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, if you are curious about the FST or if you want to know information, you can, however, get my information to chat more about it. But there is a Stretch to Win directory where you can find, there's thousands of practitioners now at this point. There's the Stretch to Win therapist directory. You can look up online and find a therapist near you. So that's an easy one where if you need to kind of find that extra help, I think is great. Again, I mentioned FRC before. There's a lot of good functional range conditioning is another really kind of up and coming body movement mobility practice that I've seen a lot of good results from. So those two I think are huge. And I mean, there's a lot of ones. I mean, where my head goes next is, your social media things or these influencers that are kind of on there. And I do a lot of that as well. But I think stuff like that is very sugary. I think you can't really follow someone or just see the stretch of the day and get much from it. I think finding someone, if there is a physical therapist or any type of body worker that is in your area, I think that accountability is huge, because when the ball's in your court, it's obviously you've gotten to this place for a reason, because you've never prioritized mobility and flexibility. And sure, you might get this sudden surge of inspiration from maybe this video or anything else you'll see online. But the key is consistency and doing it often. So it's finding ways to do that. I think that helps from talking to your trainer. If the personal trainer literally, when you're tight or immobile, again, I think there's very few things that are like no-nos or you can't do. It's just the fact of doing them more often. Sure, there might be certain strength exercises and strength conditioning stuff you might be aware of. But in terms of mobility and stretching, it can be pretty intuitive sometimes. You know where your sticky spots are. A good coach or trainer or someone could show you maybe a little better ways to go about it. But it's about developing that accountability somehow to just do it often. And that really helps when you can find someone nearby. So I think that directory would be a huge step in the right direction.
Okay. And folks, I will put everything we've talked about here, including all of Kody's contact information, into the show notes, and you guys can find that there. Now, Kody, do you have an online practice? So if somebody's like, well, that's all fine and good, but this guy sounds like he's talking my language here. Could they potentially work with you in an online relationship? Yeah.
I mean, I have done a few kind of private calls through Zoom and stuff like that. So that's like on a select basis with my availability. It's a little tougher. I do have my own website that is a membership-based site that has a whole archive of stretches and things that you can do on your own. So that's definitely helped a lot of people too, especially like clients of mine that were used to be in San Diego. They'd hop in there and be able to do a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of good. I didn't even mention my own website on this thing, but yeah, I have a great selection of all sorts of things, and you can either do routines that I've pieced together, some of my favorites, and there's kind of an archive of things separated by body part for shoulder, neck, calves, hips, back, all these things, just to give you inspiration in terms of like, oh, I've never done that one, and way you kind of self-serve. So that's definitely an option.
Right. And folks can find that over at korecovery.net. Do I have that right?
That is perfect. Yep.
Okay. Yep. And you're on Instagram at ko_stretch.
Yep. That is me.
That's where I found you.
Pretty active on there.
To your point, yeah, you've got some great videos there. And to your point, it's usually kind of that, it's what you get in a little 20-second or whatever, however long those clips are. It's kind of a stretch of the day sort of thing, but lots of really good information. That's a really good follow. So folks, definitely check that out. I know you're active on Facebook as well. So, well, Kody, what's next for you? What's on the horizon here?
Oh man, I've been anxiously checking my email. I haven't told many people this, but I am currently applying to physical therapy school. So whole full circle. I kind of taken these detours and done these really cool things, but you know, with getting married last year, buying a house, and kind of life coming up quick with the idea of kids and stuff in the near future, I've just realized, you know, I've been thinking about PT for 10 years now. And so it's like, I'd hate to get further down the line and have that choice sort of taken from me and be like, oh, I'm too busy, or have all those excuses, which it's still possible. But I'm like, this might be my last good chance to make that a reality. So I applied to a local only physical therapy program around at Idaho State. I should find out here in the next couple of weeks if I'm accepted or not. And then I'm very excited for not only school, but that's 3 years. But then after that, being able to merge that school of thought and with my own current business and practice, I think I could do some really awesome things. So that's the next big one. So I'm stoked for that.
Yeah, that's great. So you get some more education and marry that with your practical experience. And I think that's the sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
So you got a lot of folks that have a lot of academic knowledge. You have a lot of folks that have hands-on experience and that sort of knowledge, right? And then when you can marry the two of those together, that really makes you a powerful presence there. Well, Kody, we've already talked about how people can connect with you. Again, that is korecovery.net. I will drop the Instagram and the Facebook into the show notes here. But I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing all of your wisdom, your knowledge, and your passion with us. And I certainly wish you all the best in all your future endeavors.
Oh yeah, man, this was a blast. So thanks so much for having me on, Kevin. And it was great chatting with you. So thank you.
Okay, folks, that's our show for this week. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. You can find all the links to the resources we discussed in this episode over at silveredgefitness.com/episode 114. And you can continue the conversation over there as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on today's show. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is to give this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, And be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I also want to let you know that if you've enjoyed this podcast, I have other free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There you'll find my guides with my top tips on exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you and your health and wellness journey. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today. And until next time, stay strong.